great day for work here at the Happy Healthy Workplace podcast. I'm Kimberly Ficklin, your host. And every week we talk to professionals just like you all around the world because we want to find out what they do to create a profitable business, the kind of business where people really want to work. All right, today we're talking to Karen Reyburn, and Karen is the owner at The Profitable Firm. PF is the creative agency exclusively for accountants. They operate under 4 value pillars: creativity, integrity, generosity, and rest. Now, in episode 10, Karen shared with us why rest is so important in the workplace. Today, Karen's going to chat with us about #creativity. So the Profitable Firm's creativity pillar says this: naturally core to all our marketing activities, we commit to keeping an eye out for the most creative, innovative, best ideas for your marketing. And this includes investing in the creative talents of our team. We encourage our entire team to do what makes them come alive, because that will flow into the work that we do for you. Alrighty, Karen, first, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me again.
Before we started this, we just decided that we could probably talk forever and ever.
Yep.
So I'm glad we have like a main purpose when we get on the podcast.
And a deadline. That's
right?
Good.
So true. That'll help us out. Let's start with the main reason that this is one of the 4 company pillars. Why is this so important to you?
So as you mentioned at the beginning, there's 4 pillars, and we even refer to them generally in order: creativity, integrity, generosity, rest. And as we were talking about, we started actually in the previous podcast about rest, I think because it's the one that hits people the most. So people are like, creativity, yeah, okay, yeah, integrity, sure. Oh, wait, rest? So I know we covered all that, but we're going back to, in a sense, the beginning with creativity, because PF is a creative agency. So our job is to help accountants. Well, originally we looked at as our job is to help accountants do marketing. And now the longer that I've run PF and the more I've studied about creativity and learned what creativity is and who's creative and why, the more we've seen that first, every human being is creative, and that includes accountants. Mm-hmm. And one of the big things, and we've actually been studying a lot about this recently at PF, and we're running a couple events in the UK, at least at the time of recording this podcast, we're planning to run these events to talk about how accountants are creative too. And we've had to put the little star and be like, not the illegal kind, because, people joke about, the creative accountant and being illegal. That's not what it's about. It's about true creativity, but accountants don't naturally recognize themselves as being creative. So they think, creatives, those are artists and graphic designers and creative agencies and website builders, and I'm not creative. And in short, if I can do that, what we've recognized is the accountants who recognize themselves as creative and see that they have creativity, are willing to explore that creativity with themselves and their firm, they get the best marketing results every time. So having creativity as our pillar isn't just about us saying we are a creative agency and we commit to being creative on your behalf and for you and to deliver the best results for you, but also we are committed to creativity because until you recognize yourself as creative, your marketing will not have the results that you want it to have.
That's a really good point. I have to be transparent in that I struggle with finding my creativity within the marketing, with, social media and having all of the different social medias be different, right? Like you speak differently on Twitter than you do on LinkedIn, than you do on Facebook. And how does that come across if you struggle with creativity?
I was just going to ask you a question as to why and when do you find you struggle with your own creativity?
Probably when I know that I need to get some posts out and then I'm just going to sit and do them. And maybe there's a way to find, like, you're probably going to share with us, Karen, or there's a way to carve out some time. You tell.
It's really interesting what you say there, because that is entirely matching with the feedback that we get from accountants is first the pressure for creativity. So what you've just described there is going, oh no, I need to do this stuff and it needs to be creative. And you put pressure on yourself. So instead of merely sharing something that you think is relevant or something that struck you that day, it's like all this pressure comes on. And instead of truly being creative, you're trying to sell something. You're trying to promote your business. We were just talking about this in a team meeting today, actually, about different social platforms and different posts and the ones that people engage with the most. And I was giving an example of one that I had dashed off on like a Saturday morning. I had just spoken to somebody and we talked about a book that it's called They Ask You Answer. And the principle is whatever is by Marcus Sheridan. And by the way, just like complete plug for this book, I did not write it. I get nothing from the fact that you buy it, but I have found it to be the single most inspiring book for accountants in marketing. It's not written for accountants, just written for business owners. But it says, listen, if you want to write great content, listen to the questions your clients are asking you and the problems that they have, and then write about that. And the accountants go, oh, I could do that. I can write an article about this tax issue or this accounting question or this marketing question or this branding question even. I may not be able to answer it fully, but I can address that is a question that's asked, and here's what I would say to a client. And they're like, oh, that's marketing? Oh, okay, I can do that. And then as they do that, we discover their creativity. So I've been talking about this book nonstop, I feel, almost to the point of making people sick about it for a couple years. And then a friend of mine's like, hey, I don't know if you've ever heard of this book. It's called like They Ask, We Answer or something. And I'm like, are you serious right now? Like I literally have written blog posts. I've recorded videos. I buy it and give it to every member of our accelerator program for accountants. Like, how did you miss this? And I just thought it was funny. I just took it almost as a joke on myself that I figured everybody who knew me would know that I recommend this book. But here's a good friend of mine that I talk to regularly, a couple times a month at a bare minimum, and I see him all the time. And he's like, hey, I just heard of this great book. So I just posted it to say, I thought this was funny. I thought this was, kind of a joke on me. But the point is now you all know about this book. And it got tons and tons of views because it was real and it was human and it was related to something that really happened. There was a story and it wasn't salesy. So I think when it comes to marketing, if you're feeling pressure for creativity, often that's because you're not really thinking about creativity. You're thinking about sales, or you're thinking about your business, or you're thinking about yourself. And the best thing that you can do for creativity is to think about your clients or your customers and think about them and their problems and what interests them and what's funny to them and what's weird to them and what would help them. And then we can touch on these other things as well. Things like boredom and curiosity and trying new things and being willing to fail. I suppose if we want to go through anything, probably those 4 would be really good things to cover when it comes to creativity.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. I think that in a world of needing to be validated by our content, that it's hard for us as business owners when we put something out there that we think is great, but didn't get as much as what we should get out of it. Now, we are kind of talking about this, but let's back up for a minute in that a lot of mid-sized to large companies have a whole marketing department. They have, the people in their marketing department have gone to school for this. So a lot of times the smaller companies, I think, might be comparing themselves in creativity to someone else that has, say, a marketing department. So let's talk for a minute to that business owner that has maybe a small to mid-sized company, but is doing all the marketing themselves. And like you said, getting in the slump because they're just posting things just to post, and they're not posting things when it feels good and or when they have a creative idea. So give us a tip about how to carve out that time for creativity. I know there's a thing called morning pages. Have you heard of morning pages?
Yeah, I have. I've been The Artist's Way, I think is the book that, I've been through it. I definitely recommend that. That's an excellent one.
So I was just thinking about, maybe that's one way, is that in the morning you just sit down and, mentally vomit on your paper and you'll come up with a lot of creative things that way. But what's some way that you could suggest, or some way maybe that you do that besides just like the spontaneous post that you just...
I think it's a really good one. And I actually don't think that I have a tip that I can give to carve out creative time as such because creativity doesn't work in the way that other disciplines do. Creativity is the bit that doesn't fit the mold, that doesn't have a block of time, that doesn't have this thing that you've planned. But when you discipline yourself in certain areas, then creativity can come. It's rather like any writer who says, well, what's the best way to become a good writer? Start writing. Like you literally just put your hands to the keyboard or a pen to paper and you start and you write rubbish for a while until the good stuff comes. And I think this is one of the big preventers for people who want to be creative and want to build their creativity is they're going, okay, from 8 to 9 this morning, I'm going to be creative. And then from 9 to 10, I'm going to do this. And from 10 to 11, I'm going to do that. And that is not how it works, but creativity can flow from all kinds of things that you do. So it's more, and this is why it's one of the pillars at PF, it's more like a state of mind and a willingness to do things differently. So what I just mentioned a few minutes ago about these 4 things, boredom, curiosity, trying new things, and being willing to fail. If you practice those things, like you have to practice boredom. Like nobody's bored these days. We have our phone, we turn to our phones, and I'm going to put myself in this category. I have to work at boredom and daydreaming. It is something you have to work on because that is where creativity comes from. There's a guy I follow on YouTube called Brandon Ferris. He is like so hilarious, like literally so funny to the point that sometimes if I just need a laugh, I will just watch a couple of his videos. And one of the reasons he's so funny is he just tries stuff and he fails sometimes miserably, but he does it on video and he kind of shares it with you like, hey, I'm going to try this. And he had one where he decided to make this amazing cake and he bought like 19 or 20 different cakes. He was in the States. He bought it from Walmart and he made all these cakes. And then he went, well, how am I going to do something with this? He's like, at this point, and he edits the video so you only get little pieces. He's like, so this is after I've just stood there for 11 minutes staring at these cakes. He says, 1 a.m, I don't know what to do. And I thought, that's one of the keys to creativity. Mm-hmm. Just stand there for 11 minutes and stare at something. You will either come up with an idea, fall asleep, in which case, like, you weren't going to do anything anyway, or that's probably the 2 options, especially at 1 a.m. So this concept of practicing things like boredom and curiosity, they're things that children do. And we admire it in children and we go, oh, I wish I could be like children, but I'm too busy. But the reason we're busy is because we're not blocking out some time for boredom or taking it when it comes to us. If you're standing, I live in the UK, so I do a lot of like waiting for a train or I'm at the airport or something. Yes, you can sit at the airport and answer things on your phone and pull out your iPad and write content. And I do that a lot of times. But sometimes I put everything away. I even put a timer on my watch at times for like 10 minutes or 15 minutes. And I'm not allowed to pull out my phone or iPad or anything until that timer goes off. And I just people watch, or I just sit there, or I just think. And you may feel that you achieve nothing, but it's those little nothing times that contribute to your creativity. So if I had to encourage people towards creativity, it would involve boredom. So finding some time to be bored and not to see that as a fail, but to see that as something that leads you to creativity. Curiosity, and you have to do it like you have to genuinely be bored and not go, oh, I was bored for 11 minutes, but then I came up with a great idea, so my boredom was useful. If you were bored for 11 minutes and then you're bored of thinking about boredom, then that's a win. Like that is going to lead you to creativity eventually. Curiosity is another one. Again, like a child, asking questions that you don't presume the answer to. Why does this do this? How does that happen? What if I did it this way? These creativity events that we're running in the UK, I've got a couple clients that are accountants that I've been talking to about what creativity means to you. And one of my clients said, for me, creativity is about imagining something that doesn't exist. So it was the first thing he said about it. And the second thing he said that struck me was stop being so accepting of the word no, or saying, oh, well, that's just not possible. And he said, so if you always say, well, let's just challenge that. What if, or is it possible? Marcus Sheridan, who wrote that book I mentioned, They Ask You Answer, one of his favorite phrases is asking the question, is it possible that, and you just ask something, if you're saying, oh, I'd love to do a podcast, but there's so much work to it and they have to prep and I don't know what I would say. Instead, you say, well, is it possible for me to research some other podcasts and see what they do well? Oh, yeah, well, that's possible. I could do that. Is it possible for me to pick a topic that I could talk on? Well, it's possible. I can't think of one, but it's possible for me to do that. Okay. And you work your way through that so that you're getting to a different place by asking those questions that you don't necessarily know the answer to. This is very hard for accountants because they're used to knowing the answers. Somebody asks them and they say, yep, you do this. Nope, you don't do that. I know what to do here. And when it comes to marketing and creativity and boredom and curiosity and trying new things and failing, it feels like you're way out of your comfort zone, and you are, but that's what you have to practice.
I like that. That's good. I was writing some things down while you were talking. Okay, so let's go back to boredom.
Yes.
And then I'm going to sync that back to rest. Because while you were talking, and since everybody's already listened to the other episode 10, if you haven't, then catch up on that first, and you'll know what we're talking about today. But so when we were talking about rest, we talked about that it's not just sleep, but it's getting quiet with yourself, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So boredom is getting quiet with yourself. So if you're going to force yourself into a creative mode by using boredom, right? Walking away from your computer, your phone, everything, and sitting outside in the garden or whatever, you're also resting.
I think it can lead to rest. I think it's very important to distinguish that boredom in itself is not necessarily rest. Because remember, when we talked about rest, we talked about rest being something that renews you.
Right, restores, yeah.
Connect with your soul. So I think rest would be more, there is a conscious element to it. There's even a meditative element. You are resting, but you're allowing yourself to think through things. And you begin to potentially at times when you're rested, deal with some of the hard things, but that usually comes after you're rested. Mm-hmm. Boredom doesn't have a goal of any kind.
Okay.
Actually is it, and this is why most of us struggle with boredom, because we're adults. We have constant goals. And I can say this as somebody who is very goal orientated. I took one of those personality test things that I'm not a big fan of, but sometimes they can be quite spot on. And it had this thing that it measured your percentage of being goal orientated. So how much are you motivated by achieving a goal? And mine was like 89% or something. Like if I have a goal, I will hit it. But if I don't, I'll just waffle around and it'll feel useless and I'm not very motivated. And that was really helpful for me because it meant that I sometimes have to craft myself deadlines or a way to give myself a goal to hit because that's who I am. That is also why boredom is hard for me and it's hard for most humans, because we all are, at least to some point, goal-orientated, and we're used to having this massive to-do list in our lives. So it feels like rest. It feels like a waste. It feels like, well, I'm just literally sitting in the garden staring at the blue skies, watching the clouds go by. I ought to be doing something. And I think with resting, you're thinking, okay, I'm going to mull over some things. I'm going to consider who I am and connect with the world that I'm part of. And as I said, you get into some deep things there, maybe of the spirit or the soul, whereas boredom doesn't have a goal. There is no goal. You're just sitting there. And if you just sit there and stare and nothing goes through your mind, great. If tons of things go through your mind, great. And I've had some times recently myself. So Mondays are my, what I call my quiet day. So it means that I don't have any meetings, I don't have any appointments, and I don't have any deadlines for Monday. Sometimes I get lots of work done. Sometimes I get none done. Sometimes I go for a long walk. Sometimes I skip my walk. All bets are off on Monday. And sometimes I'm bored, sometimes I rest, sometimes I work, sometimes I'm creative, sometimes I watch Netflix. There's no rule for Mondays. And there have been a few times where I have gotten bored and went, this is good, Karen. This is good. You need to just sit here in this boredom and not rush to something else. And if that boredom ends up leading me towards a restful place, that's fine. If the boredom leads me to go, oh, do you know what? I was going to write a blog on this, and I make a few notes, or I suddenly get motivated to pick up a book I've been meaning to read or whatever. That's fine. Boredom often leads you to something, but you're not planning it. You're just letting yourself be bored. Does that make sense?
It does. That's a great clarifier, because I'm laughing at myself now, because I'm thinking, well, look what I tried to do.
Yeah, let's put creativity in a box. Let's figure it out.
Yeah,
But
not only that, but let's link it to another goal, which is, if I try to sit here and be creative,
yes,
then I might get into rest.
yes, yeah. Yeah, and I think that's the thing. And it is a hard one. I mean, I'm not going to pretend I have the rest thing nailed and have completely figured out. It is a tough one. And I think because every human being is different, rest looks different for different people.
Yeah.
But boredom looks the same for everybody.
Yeah.
But everybody knows when they're bored, and recognizing that that is a tool that can lead you to creativity can help you not to resent it or avoid it or act as if it's a bad thing.
So with this being a pillar, like many pillars are in business, if the leader is the one that drove the pillars in the first place, of course, you're living that way. So how do you translate that over into your employees? How do you show them how to be creative, how to have that space for themselves?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I suppose if you really want to know, you need to ask them what their impression is of how they take in creativity. But at least from my perspective, the way I know that we address this as a team is that we talk with each other about the creative things that we're doing in our lives. So for example, one of the things we do in our team meetings, we have a Zoom video team meeting every week with all the team around the globe. And the first thing we do is every person shares a personal victory and a professional or a work victory. And we did this because we want to start positive. We want to start our team meetings open and enthusiastic. So we always share a victory. But I also wanted to make sure that I was staying connected with my team personally. The personal victories could be something to do with health. You know, I went to the gym, I lost weight, I signed up for a triathlon, something like this. It could be one of the team members was sharing, you know, something about some pets in their family. We've had people share the personal victory of looking at different houses, you know, whatever, just something in their personal life that always gives us something to just kind of laugh and joke and talk about as people. And that is a tiny example of where creativity can flow from, because again, it's just thinking of things a little bit differently. You're not only focusing 100% on work. You're going, these are humans. We're people. You know, one of the team members is sharing, she was sharing all about their aquarium and their fish, and they had 5 fish and then 1 fish named for each of the family members. But she said that was kind of backfiring because one of the fish wasn't doing too well and they didn't want to associate that with one of the family members. You know, it's one of those that you think, where's this conversation going if you were trying to be all goal orientated for that? But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where it's going. They're just sharing it. You know, those little things. We read a lot of books. So if I'm reading a book that I think would be great for everyone to read, I share it. Oftentimes PF will just buy the book for the whole team, and then they'll read it and we'll talk about it. We're always looking for things that our clients are doing. That's one of the best ways that we help to build creativity, is we look at what our clients are doing. We look at what other businesses are doing. We look at what each other are doing that we just think is cool. I think that's a big part of creativity, is saying, there's that thing that I think is cool. And then you apply your mind to, how could that help PF? How could that help our clients? How could that help us as a team? And that's where this concept of what a lot of people might consider creativity, where you think differently and you step outside the box and all this. But that is where it comes from, is just looking at things a little differently. Again, back to the boredom concept, it's okay if you say, hey, I thought this article was really amazing, and everybody reads it, and you don't necessarily make a world-changing, life-changing, business-changing decision. You just like it. And it's another piece of the puzzle. And the more you're talking and sharing and looking at all these things, then the ideas come from the combination of those.
I like the idea of a weekly meeting, which most people have, but I like the idea of the sharing something great in personal and professional. Now, I have a business coach. I'm going to plug her here for a minute. Her name is Ronnie Noyes at DIY Marketing Center, and she's really an amazing person to just be around. She's a great leader, and it is it's a mastermind meeting basically. And at the beginning of it, she does the same thing, beginning and end. Actually, we start with something similar to that, which is it's one great thing that has happened to us. Grow, what does she call it? Grow and show, something like that. And I never thought about it from the perspective that you're mentioning now, because when I heard you talking, I thought, wow, so we're talking about creativity. And we've merged that with some social media and content and what to say and what not to say and not being afraid to fail and storytelling. So if you're listening to your employees and they're telling you all these fun and amazing stories about the personal and professional life, that's content. And you don't have to name names or whatever, but you could say, hey, this morning in our weekly team meeting, there was a story that got told of this. And again, that's creativity. I hadn't thought of that before. And when you talked about it, it kind of gave me an aha moment. I was like, wow, what are all the things that I share there in that meeting that I could be sharing with content? And
I think that brings us right back around to what you were saying at the very beginning. We were talking about content and, people are trying to be creative. I think sometimes that's the biggest problem is if you're trying to be creative, you're probably going to struggle. But if you're trying to be bored, and you're trying to be curious, and you're trying to try new things, and you're trying to fail, and you're trying to look at things a different way, then creativity always flows from that, because that's part of it is a mindset. You're not going to be creative no matter how much you allow yourself to be bored if you're being negative and judgmental and discouraged, I think, about everything. Like one of our internal values, we have 6 internal values, and one of them is positivity. And that's because we choose to see the blessing. We choose to see the good. There's always a good. Even in the hardest things ever, there's always good. And we choose to see that. Creativity has the same kind of premise. There is always a creative option. There is always something to help you. Actually, perfect example, that team meeting, we have a new employee who just started last week and fit right in with the personal, professional victories. He picked that up. So I started with him today and I said, okay, you go ahead. And he gave his. And then he said, oh, what do I do now? Do I pick somebody now? Like, do I pass it on? Do I say, okay, now you? And I went, oh my word, we've been running these meetings for, I think, 2 years. And I, as the owner and the leader, I'm always, okay, now this person, now this. And within seconds, he jumped to, okay, so what happens next? And I'm like, that's perfect. That's such a great idea. Let's do that. And we just instantly did that. So he picked another team member and then she did hers and picked another one and went back. And I went, I have been looking for a way to do that and to have it flow for years. And we got a new employee, and within seconds, he just saw it different because he'd never seen it before. He didn't know how it worked. So he said, well, this is what I think is good. And we all went, that is amazing. That's what we're going to do. And I think that's what true creativity is: seeing new things, involving new people, looking at things from a different perspective. One of my favorite films in the whole world is Dead Poets Society. Don't know if you've seen that one.
I have.
It's from a while back, Robin Williams, a couple other well-knowns. But one of my favorite scenes is when he just has the whole classroom of boys, he has them go and stand on his desk at the front of the room. And he said, just to see things from a different perspective, that's all. Just stand there and look at the room differently. That's classic creativity, or leads you to creativity, but it's a classic kind of tool for that, because you go, I always look at things this way. I always do things this way. What if I just turned it around? What if I listened to what somebody else thought? What if I asked a question without knowing the answer? That gets you on the path to creativity.
I love that. And I'm going to go back to your book. Is it possible that this person is more creative than I am at this moment? It's possible.
Which person?
The person who's telling you, can I pick the next person? What do we do? Is it possible that he's more creative in that moment, right? So that's a question you can ask yourself as a
really
leader.
Good question. I'm not sure whether it has to do with quantity of creativity. It's not as if he's more creative and I'm less creative. It's that his creativity has flowed from him in that moment saying, I don't know the answer. I don't know what happens next, so I'm going to suggest something. So instead of him saying, okay, so what happens next? And I just picked somebody. He made a suggestion. And then I, with a creative mindset, went, that is new and different. I'm going to accept that. I'm going to receive that. And let's roll with that. Now we have a new way of doing things within seconds.
Okay, I love that you made that point, having a creative mindset.
Yeah, so everybody has it.
Right. And instead of saying this is the way we always do it, because that is like, I feel like that's the killer of all things, that statement. It's the way we always do it.
It is.
It's like, okay, so what does that mean to me? Really nothing. And as an employee, it almost usually means nothing. So I love that you said, I love that you have a
and you have to love that. You have to be open to something new. I trained as an accountant in the States. I'm a qualified certified public accountant, CPA. Moved to Scotland 18 years ago at the time of this podcast. It was a long time ago, but when I first got my accounting degree and my CPA qualification, I worked as an auditor. And one of the big things that makes you a good auditor is that you do what they did last year. Mm-hmm. Like, that's how you set up the audit, is you go to last year's work papers and you copy them all over. I mean, this was back in the literally pencil and paper cash book kind of scenario. And you would literally copy that over. And that was good. That was right to do, because you want to make sure you didn't miss anything. But this is, again, what makes it challenging for accountants often, is there is a rule book and there are penalties and there are laws and there's, double entry bookkeeping and there's, it's got to match. But marketing and creativity and content and all of these things don't follow a set of laws. Or even if there are some guidelines about things like SEO or Google, they change constantly because people and businesses are constantly changing. I was just listening to a video or watching a video on Insta by Gary Vaynerchuk, and he said, Google algorithms don't actually exist because they're always changing. So if they're constantly changing, they're not an algorithm. Mm-hmm. They're not like a set rule. And I was like, oh my word, I've just had my mind completely blown. He's mind so right. Blown. It's not a true algorithm, because in a month's time, Google's going to go, oh, everyone does this now. So Google and its creativity is continuing to change. And that, I suppose, really, if we sum up creativity, it's being willing to change and looking for change and continually changing. And when you do that, then the creative ideas flow in. But the biggest preventer to creativity is, as you said, saying, well, that's the way we did it before. Well, that's the way the other business did it. Well, that's the way it's done. And there are some guidelines that you can look at. Like I was telling a client today, it's good for a blog post to be roughly 1,000 words. I said, if you can answer the question really well in 300 words, write the blog post. That's fine. You don't need to stretch it to 1,000 words just for Google's sake. Conversely, if you stretch it to 2,000 words and you waffle around and don't say anything, nobody's going to read it. There are some guidelines, but creativity says, I'm going to look for a different way and I'm going to question this. I'm going to try new things and I'm going to see what happens. I'm going to have fun with it. That's what some people have a hard time with, because they're looking at marketing with numbers and ROI and money and sales. And they forget that part of the good part of marketing is having fun with it, having fun with creativity and trying something, going, oh, look at that. That worked great. Or, oh, that didn't work the way I thought. I wonder why that is. And then doing something about it.
Very well said. Again, another great conversation. And I learned a lot, because I kept going back to things that didn't quite fit. So it's really interesting that this process of creativity. So I appreciate so much.
It is a process. I think that's a really important point. And I mean, again, same as with our rest talk, I feel like there's like thousands of things that we didn't cover, which is classic for creativity. You're never going to cover it all. But the more I study about it and about how accountants have all this creativity, and I see it all the time, because they come up with ideas and then they come to us and say, well, I was thinking this, or what if this? That's when we bring an idea to it, and together we turn it into something. So accountants are creative. Little kids are creative. Old people can be creative. Everybody is creative by nature of being a human. We are created to be creative. That is part of our nature. But many of us have learned to stuff it down. And what I want to encourage everyone in my team and all my clients, but everyone listening to this podcast to practice is to raise it up again, because it's a skill that is there. You don't have to make it. You don't have to create it. You don't have to try to find it. I mean, I suppose you have to try and find it in the sense you have to drag it up from where you've stuffed it down.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I want to encourage people to do. It has to begin in the mind. It's a mindset change.
That gives me some thoughts about business. I was getting ready to start doing some play shops for corporate, and I just didn't follow through with it. And I think actually would be quite fun because it would open a space for creativity.
What are they? What's
adult play shops?
Oh.
So it's a workshop, but it's basically everybody plays.
That sounds so fun. And see, that's so creative. You're like, it's not a workshop, it's a play shop.
It's a play shop.
Well, actually, that's a really good point. I remember I ran a workshop years and years ago. I actually worked for an accountancy firm at the time, but we ran these business development seminars, and we were doing this one on coming up with, great ideas. And I read somewhere that the best way to get your mind going for new ideas is to have something for your hands to play with. So like toys or a ball or even a pen or anything, just something for your hands to play with while you're thinking. So I went to the pound shop, the equivalent of like the dollar store, whatever, and got all these cheap toys and just threw them on the tables at the workshop. And you had these were like men and women coming in suits and heels and all this. And they're like, ooh, look at this. Oh, look at, there's like a spring and there's like a little water gun, and they're shooting at each other and just having the time of their lives. And then I said, okay, we're going to get started. And they all dropped the toys and went, oh, right. Okay. And I'm like, no. The whole point of this is play with it, like mess about with it while you're listening to me, be playing with these toys, and it will stimulate your ideas. So I love that idea. Like, with creativity, you go back to some of the core things of childhood and be bored and daydream and be curious and play just for the sake of playing.
Just play. I like that. But it does actually it's encouraging me, because I was really close to having these as a part of my offering. So interesting. I'm going to think about that a little bit more. So I appreciate that. You're making me feel creative right now, or helping me feel creative right now.
Well, feel free to just sit and be bored later, and it might just flow through your mind.
I might just do that, Karen. I think that's actually a great idea. So again, a great conversation with you, Karen. You always have the best insight for us. We're going to look forward to the next chat, which will be about integrity, because we're going to keep these in order for you now.
That's right.
But that's the end of it today. So thank you so much for being here again.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Always my pleasure. Okay, so don't forget to check the website, the Happy Healthy Workplace Podcast, for show notes and links to everything that we talked about today. This is the close of the Happy Healthy Workplace Podcast. Have a happy, healthy day. That's a wrap for today. The Happy Healthy Workplace Podcast is now complete. Be sure to subscribe and join us weekly for secrets, solutions, or strategies that help you create a profitable business where people really want to work. This is Kimberly Ficklin, wishing you a happy, healthy day.